Faces. Hey teacher, give her an A.
Alright, here we go.
Oh, you know, what if she thought this was her family?
Okay, you guys ready for this?
Yes.
Thank you for letting me do this and share this with you. The interesting story that I chose to share is one called The Pale Maiden, and this is a narrative folk tale. Although I grew up in the southern United States, my mother's ancestry is Polish, and as such, I've always been fascinated with Slavic folk tales. So today I will be sharing with you one of my favorite Polish folk tales entitled The Pale Maiden. The version I'm reading is taken from the book 60 Folk Tales from Exclusively Slavic Sources by A.H. Radislau, and it was published in 1890. A peasant farmer in reduced circumstances had a beautiful daughter, whom an old knight, the proprietor of the village, wanted to marry, and that even by compulsion. But the damsel disliked him, and her parents also refused to consent to the marriage. So the proprietor persecuted them in every way in his power, and so oppressed them with forced labor and ordered them to be beaten on the slightest occasion, that the poor farmer could hold out no longer, but determined to remove from the village with his whole family. In the cottage in which the farmer dwelt, there was something continually grating behind the stove, but though they searched several times, and turned the seat constructed at the side of the stove upside down, yet they were unable to discover aught. But when, on the day of their departure, they were removing the rest of their goods, they heard a more and more articulate grating, and whilst they were impatiently listening, as the grating and scraping went on, out of the stove sprang a thin, pale form like a buried maiden. "What the devil is this?" cried the father. "For heaven's sake!" screamed the mother, and all the children after her. "I am no devil," said the thin, pale maiden, "but I am your poverty. You are now taking yourselves off hence, and you are bound to take me with you to your new abode." Now the poor householder was no fool. He bethought himself a little, and neither seized nor throttled his poverty, for she was so slight that he could have done nothing of any consequence to her. But he made the lowest possible reverence to her, and said, "Well, your gracious ladyship, if you are so well satisfied amongst us, then come with us. But as you see, we are removing everything for ourselves, so help us to carry something, and we shall get off the quicker." Now Poverty agreed to this, and wanted to take a couple of small vessels out of the house. But the householder distributed the small vessels among his children to remove, and said that there was still a block of wood in the yard which must also be taken away. Going out into the yard, he made a cut in the block from above with his axe. He then called Poverty, and politely requested her to help him remove the block. Poverty did not see on which side to lift the block, till, when the farmer pointed out the cleft to her, she put her long, thin fingers in the cheeks. The farmer, pretending to lift the block on the other side, suddenly pulled out his axe out of the cleft, and Poverty's long, thin fingers remained squeezed in the block, so that, being utterly unable to pull them out, she shrieked out immediately in what pain she was, but all in vain. The farmer removed all his goods as well as his children, quitted the cottage completely, and returned to the place no more. When the farmer settled in another village, things went with him so prosperously that ere long he was the richest man in the whole village. He married his daughter to a respectable and wealthy farmer's son, 20 years old, and the whole family prospered. On the other hand, the proprietor of the first village, the oppressor of these poor people, having to assign vacant cottages to fresh tenants, came to inspect the cottage left vacant by the reduced farmer, who had refused to give him his daughter. Seeing Poverty beside the block, complaining of the pain of her fingers, he took pity on the pale maiden, took her fingers out by means of a wedge, and set her completely free. From the time of her liberation, the pale maiden never quitted the side of her liberator, and when, moreover, the devil lit a fire in the old stove, and the proprietor went dotty with love in his old age, he spent and ran through everything that he had. That is the end of our folk tale. Now, the unknown writer of this tale reveals much of the Slavic cultural perspective through the details of this simple story. Slavic culture, up until the industrial and modern age, was largely based upon a farmer's lifestyle, dependent upon the cyclical phases of weather, work, and harvest. In The Pale Maiden, the story is shared from the perspective of just such a peasant farmer. Describing his powerlessness against the much wealthier knight reveals the way the social world worked in this small Polish village. The farmer, being a good and loving father, didn't wish to marry his daughter to an unworthy, although more socially prestigious man. As the story progresses, we come to realize that the real source of the farmer's problems wasn't the village proprietor, but rather the maiden Poverty, who had been secretly diminishing all the farmer's efforts. Many listeners would identify with the farmer's plight because poverty was often a way of life for Slavic farmers. However, we also learn by watching the farmer's sly intelligence at work that it is possible and permissible for the commoner to overcome his misery. Poverty and the persistent suitor may be dealt with if one uses indirect ways. In the end, our witty farmer has outfoxed the pale maiden, left behind the old suitor, and secured for his family prosperity, connections, and happiness. Stories like the Pale Maiden share remarkable similarities to our lives today. We often feel victimized by circumstances beyond our control. We want our needs met and our children to be happy. We dream and work to be victorious over our challenges. It's the shared emotions that I discover by reading folk tales that remind me of how man is essentially the same, regardless of our place in time or culture. That's the end of this exposition on it. Do you guys have any questions about the story or any of the things that I shared about it in any way? No?
No.
Pretty good?
Yay!